is Mr. Philippe Garo, who is the director of McLEANS. Your group is a major player, in fact. Since 1993. Voilà. You don't just cover whole life insurance, but you're involved in the third-party coverage as well. With respect to accidental damage to the environment due to oil spills. We've had the opportunity, we thought it was particularly interesting to ask you to speak to us and to hear your proposal. You're going to speak to us about the way you perceive things as an insurer and payment for damages. I'll give you the floor, Mr. Garo. Thank you, Mr. Tamic. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Ambassador, directors, hello, and I thank Cedre for inviting me to speak here today on this subject of containers. And of course, we talked about risk insurance and accidentology. So there are 2 points that I wanted to make. First of all, containers lost at sea, and then fires on board. You know that container ships are increasingly large in size. You can see on my slide the various names given to these container ships of varying sizes. We've already now reached the ultra-large container vessels, the ULCVs, largest to date. And as we mentioned, in 15 years' time, the size and the capacity has doubled. In 2020, we're practically 24,000 containers for and Ocean Network Express, the Japanese, declared that they had signed a letter of intention, memo of intention to construct a vessel that would be larger than 24,000 boxes. As concerns fire, following the fire aboard the MAERSK that was had to spend 3 months at sea before aboard the Hyundai. Unfortunately, there were 3 seamen who died in this accident. With respect to, this was the year where we had the largest number of fires on the 3rd of January. We had the Lloyd covered. Sorry. You know that the ship owner legally filed for recourse. So there'll be a legal decision for damages of $15 million in January of the same year with the Vancouver, which was OPL. And the photo at the bottom of the page, and I will come back to this one, is the key NTC from Hong Kong, 1,500 TEUs, and at least in the immediate surroundings, there were people who had to go to hospital following the fire. An estimated damage, estimated by the Port Authority, of 28 million euros. In Le Havre, with 10,000 boxes on board. And you can add, this was not a container vessel proper, but a container ro-ro, mixture of the two. And this wasn't too far from our coastline in the Bay of Biscay. And I give you some figures. I talked with the insurer last week on that. We know that as concerns the damages, not the loss of the vessel itself, but all of the goods and all of the fees and costs invoiced is certainly greater than $40 million. So overall, insurers, like everyone else, consider that the risk of fire aboard large container ships is a major hazard or risk. And of course, as mentioned here, we've heard already this morning, companies are making major efforts, and the insurers, in fact, are looking for risk management procedures to prevent risk. Now, there's an insurer called the TT Club based in London, and they can cover 40%, I believe, of the world fleet for containerized transport. Problems of goods which are carried in containers. And in 2019, on average, every 60 days, a fire broke out on board somewhere. I have a report from Allianz in 2019 about maritime safety, and they said that there were 40 significant fires related to goods every 10 days. So following these fires in 2019, in this approach to risk management, the TT Club started a program. They called it the Cargo Integrity Group. The idea was to promote better safety of containers and to raise awareness very strongly and significantly with respect to stakeholders to ensure that declarations are made correctly, as we mentioned earlier, and indicate when dangerous goods are being transported. And the TT Club also works with a number of other organizations, the World Shipping Council, the WSC, for example, the International Cargo Handling Coordination Association, Association of Loaders, Global Shippers Forum, and all of these work together within the Cargo Integrity Group, working to improve safety of goods traffic or transport. They base this, and very strongly so, on the critical practices for security for the global supply chain, and taking into account of provisions, as we heard from Madam Ambassador this morning, the packing of cargo transport units, the CTU code of practice. And of course, you had input and coordination with the IMO, the ILO, and the UNECE. So the CIG, in fact, published this quick guide to the CTU code. You see a copy of the cover on the screen. And this is basically a roadmap to better single out the practices, good practices, and to ensure you have proper loading and stuffing, whether it be on a trailer or in a container. Now, it's not always extremely practical for the operators. Now, with respect to fire aboard container ships. The IMUI, which is the International Insurers Association, they work with Allianz and the GCS, the Alliance for Global Corporate and Specialty Insurance. They studied the types of accidents that take place aboard container ships, and some technology was mentioned. They drew up a white paper, and as we heard this morning, checking the temperature of goods, cargo temperature control, and setting out the limits of being able to fight fire on board. We heard about in the previous presentation. Also, the VGM, Verified Gross Mass, introduced in July of 2016 as being mandatory. Now, there was a law professor who said that maritime law is always struggling to keep up. We're always one catastrophe or one disaster too late or behind. So obviously the legal reactions and provisions that are adopted following accidents will change. And it was Emerson Napoli in 2012, a container ship which ran aground, and there were 660 containers, which were lost. And the weight was higher by 3 tons for each of the containers. More generally speaking, the TT Club, in fact, has indicated that 66% of global multimodal transport accidents or incidents, in fact, are due to bad process, misdeclaration, and incorrect documentation. So it's an overall approach to the marine, aviation, and transport insurance. This creates sums of over $500 million per year. This generates the cost for the insurers. And we saw that it was estimated in 2018 that if you have fire that breaks out on a container ship with 15,000 TEUs, the total loss that could be generated could be $1 billion. So you can see how this has evolved and how this will evolve as the size of container ships increases over time. So that's the case for fire. You also have the question of firefighting equipment on board, of ways to extinguish these fires. There's a lot of work done with respect to what we call misdeclarations. You have this point that was put forward by the International Union of Marine Insurers, the IUMI, which indicated that misdeclarations, you had situations where goods weren't declared at all. And in some cases that were easily inflammable. Now, you see the photo at the top of the slide. This is Caroline MAERSK. We had goods that were declared as being hose pipes, and in fact there was in the hold there was coal, and normally it was a class 4.2 with respect to the IMGD code. Should have been under these indications, the cargo should have been placed on deck. And on the 26th of May 2018, with the KMC Hong Kong, which exploded, and you had calcium chloride, calcium hydrochloride, which had not been declared. And the first case I had to deal with myself was in 1999 with a similar explosion. In legal terms, I could say, with respect to private sector law and transport of goods, carry of goods by sea, you can have acceptable cases for loss of liability. Now, there are a number of elements that can be can create exceptions. In the case of fire, you have the Convention for Lading, Bills of Lading, the packet called 2425, and the Hague Rules and the Hague-Visby Rules. Now, these rules cover 80% of maritime transport overall, of shipping overall. And the maritime carrier is exonerated, relieved from liability with respect to the cargo. With respect to international shipping, you have these various laws, and the Hamburg Rules adopted in '78. What you have to bear in mind is that the maritime carrier can be exonerated when there's a fire, providing that there's been no fault or negligence. So, an exception for fire, unless this was really a fault which is considered to be a serious fault. The second point about accidents concerns containers lost at sea. I know that the first file I had to work on, first case I had to work on, was in 1993, he said, but with the Cherbourg. This was only 2 years after the IMO Code of Safe Practice for Cargo Stowage and Securing was adopted. Now, of course, there have been some very significant marine casualties or events with containers lost at sea. I think the largest overall was the Mole Comfort. They had some 8,000 containers on board, and they lost 5,578 at sea. And it split in half, and the stern sank, and then the bow sank later. So these 5,578 containers had a value of $520 million US. That was determined by the P&I Club, and I'll come back to P&I clubs in a moment. So, of course, they made attempts to tow, as you can see on the photo at the top on the right of the slide. Another well-known event that is maybe more, comes closer to the hearts of the French here, because it was off the coast of Brittany here, the 520 TEUs lost at sea. Now, in that particular file, this was 2014, they said it was an exceptional event. So there was an exceptional request made to map the movements of the containers. And then the MSC Zoe, this cost tens and dozens of millions of euros. because there were some 20 containers that had spare parts for cars, furniture, toys, all this washed up on the Wadden Islands, 3 of the Wadden Islands in the northern part of the Netherlands. The APL England in 2020 had an incident off Australia, and it was the Australian Maritime Authority indicated that the lashing material used was inadequate and that the securing on deck was insufficient. The P&I Club for this vessel had issued a guarantee, a warranty of $22 million to go and recover the various containers that were still floating. Then 3 other events that came close on each other's heels. One Apus was a container ship. You can see the condition it was in when it arrived in harbor. Some 1,815 containers, 40 of them dangerous. And there were some, I'm sorry, $1 million. So the Maersk Essen, this was in the Pacific Ocean in February 2021. And then the Maersk Eindhoven on the 17th of February 2021. 2,800 containers lost at sea near Japan, whereas they were heading for Los Angeles under very difficult conditions. So in fact, these go against what the World Shipping Council statistics would indicate, saying that between 2008 and 2019, there was an average of 1,382 containers lost at sea. And the outlook with respect to containerization, the first point is as of the 1st of January, now these figures are for 2020, I don't have the figure for today, but in January 2020, there were 5,360 container vessels worldwide. And to give you an idea, there's some 52,000 vessels plying the seas worldwide at a given time. So the growth has been exponential. This has already been mentioned. If we take the TEUs, the 20-foot equivalent units, in 2016, there were some 130 million of these containers carried worldwide. In 2019, 226 TEUs, and their merchant value, commercial value, was greater than 4,000 billion US dollars. So obviously for ship owners, what are we going to cover? Well, first of all, the vessel itself, the hull. If you have hull and machine insurance, which covers this, and covers the ship owner in the case of loss of his ship. Now, I mentioned these organizations called the P&I clubs, P for protection and I for indemnity. For those of you who aren't really familiar with them, most of you are, I'm sure, but just a very brief bit of history that it was, in fact, a British institution created in the 19th century. These clubs, in fact, operate with on the basis of non-profit making for marine insurance. So basically, all these ship owners put some money in the pot and then share the risk in the case of having to pay for damages. Initially, they were looking for insurance. It would be liability insurance that would be most effective. And the idea already existed in the previous century, that there were protection clubs which existed, whole clubs which existed, and they brought them together to, in fact, create protection indemnity clubs that would cover the risk to cargo, and then expanded it to cover the legal risks if a ship owner was judged to be responsible and thus liable. All this led to the creation, or at least spotlighted, this cargo liability risk, which means that ship owners or ship transporters have liability with respect to the cargo they're carrying, which was not the case previously. So very briefly, I can say that these P&I clubs, which is a system which came into being and has continued to date, provides considerable protection, particularly in major incidents and accidents, maritime casualties. They are going to help the ship owners, who are their members, to manage these cases and these affairs. There are 13 that are called the International Group, P&I Club International Group. Maybe a bit difficult to read them on this slide, but you can see that in Norway, there's the GARD and the SCUD, and Japan P&I Club, the American P&I Club in the US, and all the others are British in origin. And so in terms of the tonnage insured, GARD is first, and in fact it goes round, if you like. 75% of the international P&I group is quite significant. So you'll forgive me, but what I can say that each club covers each member, each event for $10 million. And once you go over that sum, it falls into what we call a pool claim, and then that can go to $100 million US. If the cost is higher than $100 million US, you have general excess of loss, which is going to cover $1 billion, and then an additional, actually $2.1 billion, and then another billion comes from what we call the collective overspill. This is kind of protection that P&I clubs can provide to shipholders. They also have a role of prevention. I think it's rather significant. Two examples, and I've almost finished. With respect to proposals, with respect to containers, they made a publication called Container Securing, and another called Container Focus, pertaining to the loss of containers at sea. These were very interesting publications. The Swedish club, I have taken a few figures from this one. In 2020, 4% of the cases were concerned containers lost at sea, of 1.25. And there were 200, sorry, I went too fast. The main cause that the club detected was bad weather conditions. 50% of the time. So it's important for ships to avoid sensitive areas where there's storms, bad weather conditions. The second cause is that the stuffing securing by the shipper was inadequate or insufficient. And 26.5%, but I think the figure would be the same for other clubs as well. So first cause, weather. The second, with respect to cost, is this insufficient securing for 8%. I would conclude, not necessarily on a note of hope or optimism, but we did note the maximum number of claims between 2013 and 2017. And since 2018, the number of claims has dropped. There seems to be a downward trend, which would tend to confirm that the various initiatives undertaken for security and safety are beginning to bear fruit. And finally, I would quote the World Shipping Council that stated in 2020 in their update that containers lost overboard represent less than 1,000th of 1% of the roughly 226 million containers currently shipped each year. Now, nevertheless, the liner shipping industry remains committed and vigilant, continuing to partner with governments and other stakeholders to enhance container safety in order to further reduce the number of containers lost at sea. And on that point, I thank you for your attention.